"You're so together, Harper. I don't know how you do it." Madison said it with the kind of wistful admiration that sounded like a compliment, until you heard the second half. She was standing in the middle of my kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in the cream throw blanket I'd draped across the arm of the couch earlier that day. She'd been here for less than an hour and already moved through the place like it belonged to her. Her almond milk latte sat half-finished on the counter beside a bowl of olives I hadn't put out. And as she spoke, she twirled one of the eucalyptus stems from the arrangement I had spent 35 minutes perfecting. "You always land on your feet," she added. "It must be nice." That was the moment I felt it, that unmistakable sinking twist in my stomach. Like the air had shifted. Like something I hadn't invited had entered my home. I glanced past her toward the living room, where the first of my guests had started to trickle in. Co-workers from the architecture firm, 2 neighbors from the unit downstairs, and my friend Elijah from graduate school. They were holding the drinks I'd poured, complimenting the built-ins I'd spent months designing, asking where the sunlight hit at 4 p.m. This was supposed to be my night. My clean slate. My moment to show the life I had built from the splinters of every decision I'd made over the past 10 years. The move to Denver. The job change. The therapy. The silence. But now Madison was here. Unannounced. And nothing about this moment was going to go how I planned. My name is Harper Lane. I'm 39 years old. I'm an associate principal architect for one of the most competitive firms in Denver. I just bought my first home, a mid-century modern fixer-upper in Washington Park that I restored down to the studs. And until about 90 minutes ago, I thought I was finally free. Free from the guilt, the old patterns, the responsibility of managing someone else's emotional chaos. But I was wrong. I was standing in my own kitchen, my name on the deed, my hands on the blueprint, and somehow still bracing myself for the impact of my sister's presence like it was a natural disaster I had foolishly failed to prepare for. When I'd sent the digital invitation for my housewarming 3 weeks ago, I hadn't even included Madison. Not because I was being cruel, but because I was being honest. We hadn't spoken in 6 months. The last time we saw each other was at our mother's birthday dinner in Santa Cruz, where Madison arrived 40 minutes late, insisted the restaurant switch her meal to a gluten-free vegan option that wasn't on the menu, and spent most of the evening subtly implying that our parents only really support Harper because she's easy to brag about. I'd driven back to San Francisco that night with a silence in my chest that felt colder than the Pacific. I knew she was spiraling again. That much was obvious. The job she'd started and left in the same fiscal quarter, the car she'd totaled without insurance, the new healer boyfriend she swore had a gift. It was the same cycle I had watched for most of my adult life. The implosion, the self-narration, the arrival on my doorstep. And yet, here she was. Not in Santa Cruz. Not in Oakland. But in Denver. At my home. My sanctuary. No warning. No apology. No explanation beyond a casual. I was feeling disconnected and thought it might be grounding to be around family for a while. Grounding. Like I was a retreat center she could check into. I excused myself and walked toward the powder room, closing the door softly behind me. For a moment, I just stood there in the muted silence, staring at the flickering candle I had lit earlier. My reflection looked almost apologetic in the mirror, like I was trying to explain to myself how this had happened. There was a knock on the door. "Harper," Elijah's voice. "Sorry, just wanted to make sure you're okay. You've been in there a minute." I inhaled. Smiled. "Yeah," I said through the door brightly. "Just a little lipstick touch-up." By the time I rejoined the group, Madison had positioned herself in the center of the living room, casually holding court. Someone had asked how she liked Denver so far, and she was telling them she'd just arrived but already felt a major energetic shift here. Her words. Energetic shift. I moved through the crowd, topping off drinks, checking the playlist, nodding where appropriate. I could feel her presence like static, every word she spoke tugging the focus toward her. I knew this game. Knew it too well. Madison had always had a way of inserting herself into the center of things. Not with force, but with a kind of artful helplessness that made people feel protective, curious, responsible. She didn't hijack moments. She absorbed them slowly like a sponge in a puddle. 10 minutes into the night, she was talking about shadow work. By 20 minutes, she was explaining the importance of dismantling the myth of personal productivity. At the 30-minute mark, she had gathered 4 people around her on the sofa, talking about how she was deprogramming from capitalism and considering launching a podcast for women in transition. And I was scraping crusted brie off my charcuterie board, wondering how I'd become a background character at my own celebration. It was Elijah who finally pulled me aside. "Is this okay?" he asked gently, gesturing toward the scene. She kind of took over. I smiled too quickly. She's just being Madison. But inside me, something was shifting. 'Cause this time, it wasn't just a dinner. It wasn't a family event she derailed. This was my space. My clean start. My home. And that's when I felt the wine glass in my hand snap. Just a pop, and then it was gone. Broken. Like something inside me had finally given way. I looked down to see the blood rising along my palm. No one else had noticed. Madison was mid-anecdote about how language colonizes our nervous system. And I realized with bone-deep clarity, she hadn't come here to reconnect. She had come here to anchor herself in the world I had built. And I was done letting her do it. The funny thing about starting over is that it never looks like you imagined. When I first moved to Denver, I told myself it would be temporary, a 1-year reset, maybe 2. I'd take the job offer from Elliott plus James Architects, clear out the clutter in my life, and then reassess. At the time, I didn't realize that reassess was code for finally learn how to breathe again. San Francisco had stopped feeling like home years ago, though I didn't want to admit it. Too many ghosts in too few square miles. Too many dinners where I smiled tightly while Madison vented about our emotionally avoidant upbringing. Too many holidays that ended in one of her disappearing acts. Too many mornings staring at the Pacific, trying to convince myself I felt lucky to be where I was. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt used up. I was 38, newly single after ending a 5-year relationship with a man who had loved the idea of me far more than the person I actually was. We lived together in a 4th-floor walk-up in the Mission District, where the rent was a small mortgage and the arguments were always about space, emotional, physical, spiritual. He had wanted someone softer. I had wanted someone more self-aware. By the end, I didn't even blame him for misunderstanding me. I had spent years performing the part of the capable partner, the dependable daughter, the adult who could always be counted on to keep the wheels turning. Somewhere along the way, I had mistaken usefulness for love. So when I got the email from Elliott plus James, a position they'd created specifically for someone with my project background and design focus, I said yes within 24 hours. I sold most of what I owned. I broke the lease. I packed 2 suitcases and shipped 3 boxes. I left a long note for my therapist and a short one for my ex. And I moved to Denver with a numb kind of determination. I wasn't chasing anything. I was just trying to get far enough away to finally hear my own thoughts. The job, as it turned out, was more than a job. It was a lifeline. People were brilliant and direct. Projects were ambitious. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone who had it all together. I was someone who knew what she was doing. And slowly, the numbness wore off. By month 5, I was sleeping better. By month 7, I joined a hiking group and a book club. By month 9, I had a savings account again, a new therapist, and, perhaps most importantly, the desire to build something for myself. That's when I found the house. It wasn't much when I first saw it: peeling paint, warped floors, a sunroom that smelled like mildew and regret. But I knew, with the kind of certainty that hums in your bones, that it could be something beautiful. Something mine. I poured everything I had into it. Nights and weekends, lunch breaks and holidays. I refinished the floors myself, painted every wall, sourced vintage light fixtures, and rewired the cabinets. Every inch of this space was touched by my hands, shaped by my vision. It wasn't just a house. It was a quiet declaration. I can do this. I can have a life that belongs to me. And so I planned the housewarming not because I wanted attention, but because I wanted to share the feeling. I wanted people to step into this space and understand what it meant to start over with purpose. I ordered handwritten invitations, made a playlist with the same obsessive attention I'd once reserved for client presentations, designed a menu with regional wines, seasonal cheeses, and dishes from the farm-to-table restaurant I discovered on my first solo birthday dinner in Colorado. I didn't want a party. I wanted a threshold, a moment where I crossed from survival into something resembling peace. I never imagined Madison would be part of it. She hadn't been a part of anything for the past 6 months, and honestly, I'd taken that silence as a gift. After the Santa Cruz incident, I had finally decided I wasn't going to keep handing her access to my life just because we shared a bloodline. I didn't tell her I moved. I didn't send her pictures. I didn't owe her that. Growing up, people always said we were opposites. I was the stable one, organized, quiet, goal-oriented. Madison was the wild card, the free spirit, the emotional open wound that everyone felt obligated to soothe. Our parents, Ann and Reed Lane, were the kind of gentle suburban liberals who believed every tantrum had a cause and every failure was an opportunity for reflection. They gave us love in equal measure, but discipline in wildly different doses. When I brought home straight A's, I got a nod of approval. When Madison skipped school because she was emotionally overwhelmed, she got a family meeting and a day off to paint. When I got my first internship at a firm downtown, they asked if I was eating enough. When Madison dropped out of college for the 3rd time, they paid for her therapy and sent her on a yoga retreat in Arizona. They meant well. I know that now. They just didn't know how to say no to the child who broke things loudly, so they leaned harder on the one who kept it all together quietly. I didn't resent them for it. Not then. Not even now. But I did learn to become small so others could feel big. And by the time I was old enough to understand the pattern, I was already inside it. That's why the silence after Santa Cruz had felt like breathing room. For once, I wasn't cleaning up her mess. I wasn't offering my couch, my car, my money, or my attention. I wasn't checking in because she'd posted something cryptic at 2 a.m. I was just living. And it was enough. So when I opened the front door that evening and saw Madison standing there in her oversized scarf and woven leather sandals, smiling like this was the most natural thing in the world, my body went cold. "Surprise," she said, holding up a gift bag that I would later discover contained a candle she had clearly already used. I just felt like it was time to reconnect. There was a flash in her eyes, a look I knew too well. Combination of charm and calculation. She wasn't here to reconnect. She was here because something had collapsed elsewhere, and I was still her favorite emergency exit. I should have told her it wasn't a good time. Should have sent her to a hotel. Should have reminded her, calmly and without guilt, that she had chosen to disappear and that I had chosen to stop chasing her. But I didn't. 'Cause somewhere deep in me, the old reflexes were still alive. Still whispering, "Don't make it worse. Don't make her feel rejected. Don't be the villain in her story." So I let her in. And now, 3 hours later, I was bleeding from a shattered wine glass, wondering how it had happened again. I should have known she wasn't leaving that night. But it wasn't until I walked into the guest room and saw her duffel bag unzipped across the bed, clothes spilling out like a warning sign, that it hit me. She didn't come for the party. She came to stay. "Just for a few nights," she said when I asked. She was curled up on the couch with my linen throw and a mug of the turmeric tea I kept in the back of the cabinet, the kind I only drank when I was sick. She didn't ask before opening it. Just assumed, like she always did, that what was mine was available by default. "I needed a reset," she added with a tight smile. "And you seemed grounded. I figured being around you might help." That was how she phrased it. like I was a station she could charge herself at. No thought to what it might drain from me. I remember standing there, my jaw slightly clenched, the overhead light casting shadows in the corners of the room I had painted in pale dove gray for a sense of peace. And in that moment I wanted to scream. Not because she was there, but because I knew I was going to let her stay. Not because I agreed, but because I was still tethered to that ancient muscle memory that said, if she's broken, you fix it. Madison had always been the tornado. I was the scaffolding. She swirled through life in dramatic gusts of emotion and reinvention, while I quietly reinforced the structure behind her. We were adults now, technically, but nothing had changed. The first night, she took the guest bed. The second night, she took over the living room. By the third, she had commandeered the record player I had lovingly restored from a vintage shop on South Broadway. She played old Joni Mitchell albums late into the night, claiming the sound helped her sleep. I didn't tell her that I could hear the soft warble of lyrics through the vents in my bedroom, that I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling that old creeping sensation of being a visitor in my own home. She didn't offer to help with groceries. She didn't clean the coffee grounds she spilled across the counter every morning. She took long showers and used my almond oil without asking. She left damp towels on the hooks I'd installed precisely to keep everything orderly. It was death by 1,000 kindnesses. Because she was kind in that vaguely manipulative way she'd always mastered. She thanked me for being such a safe space. She told me my home felt like a hug. She complimented the tiling in my bathroom and asked if I'd help her design a space like this someday. Every word was dipped in flattery, but none of it felt like love. And when I tried, gently, so gently, to ask what her plans were, she just smiled. Honestly, she said, pushing her hair behind her ear in that practiced, vulnerable way, I don't really know. I just knew I couldn't be in California anymore. It was suffocating. I knew that code, too. Something had gone wrong. A lease, a breakup, a failed plan. Madison never arrived somewhere without leaving a mess behind her. But instead of saying that, I nodded. Well, I'll do what I can to support you while you're here, I said. My voice sounded sweet, tasted like resentment. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, staring at the contact name, Elijah. I wanted to text him. Wanted to say, you were right. She's taken over. Wanted someone to tell me I wasn't imagining it. But I didn't send anything. Because I still wasn't ready to admit how badly I'd slipped back into an old role. See, Madison never raised her voice. She didn't demand or argue. She just occupied. She filled space until you couldn't move without brushing against her needs. She made her presence feel inevitable. And then, when you tried to draw a boundary, she made it sound like rejection. She's sensitive, my mother always said. She's manipulative, I used to whisper into my pillow. But I never said it out loud. Not to her. Not even to myself. Until now. 'Cause this time something felt different. Not just frustrating, but threatening. As if letting her stay was undoing something vital I had built in the past year. My silence. My solitude. My peace. There's a kind of erosion that happens when you shrink yourself for long enough. You stop noticing the leaks until the foundation's unstable. And I had worked too damn hard to pour this new foundation, career, therapy, home, self. So when I woke up the next morning and found her journaling at the kitchen island in my robe, sipping coffee from the mug I always used on Mondays, the one with the little quote inside the rim, I felt something solid shift inside me. I didn't say anything. Not yet. But I made a note. Clear one. This was not going to continue. Not this time. It happened over the last slice of sourdough. Of all things. A slice of bread on a Thursday morning in a house I had built with my own hands in a city I had chosen during a week that was supposed to mark a new beginning. And somehow that moment, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the soft hum of the dishwasher, and the single remaining slice of bakery sourdough, was what undid me. I had bought the loaf 2 days earlier from a little place on Pearl Street that bakes in small batches and sells out by noon. It had been a small ritual I'd built for myself over the past year. Go early, get the sourdough, toast a slice each morning with sea salt butter and fig jam. Quiet pleasure. A reward for showing up for my own life. I came downstairs that morning, hair still wet from the shower, ready to start my workday. I had 3 back-to-back meetings and a materials presentation for a new client. I was already preparing my mental checklist when I saw Madison at the counter, headphones in, barefoot again, cheerfully finishing the last slice. "Morning," she said brightly. "That bread is insane. I hope you don't mind, I just couldn't resist." She didn't notice the silence that followed. Or if she did, she pretended not to. She was still chewing when she turned to me and added, "You should totally get more of that today." And that was it. Something in me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, decisive snap of a thread that's been pulled too tightly for too long. I took a breath, then another. Set down my laptop bag without speaking. My heart was hammering harder than it should have been over bread, but I knew this wasn't about bread. Never was. "Madison," I said slowly. "We need to talk." She glanced up, startled by the change in my voice. I hadn't used that tone with her since, well, maybe ever. I had always softened it, rounded off the edges. But not this time. "Sure," she said cautiously. "What's up?" I leaned against the opposite counter, needing something solid behind me. "I need to know what your plan is," I said. "How long you're planning to stay." She blinked, then laughed like I'd made a joke. "I mean, I haven't figured it out yet," she said. "I assumed it was okay for now. I didn't think you'd want me to rush out." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence land. Her smile faltered. She continued, "I needed a break, Harp. I figured you'd understand. I've been going through a lot." I nodded. "I believe you. And I'm sorry for whatever's been heavy for you. But I need my space back." She stared at me. "I don't say that to be cruel," I added. "But I didn't invite you here, Madison. You showed up unannounced during a moment that was incredibly important to me, and I made space because I didn't know how to say no without guilt." There it was. Truth finally spoken aloud. I saw it hit her. Her expression hardened. Not visibly, but subtly. The corners of her mouth dipped, her shoulders pulled back, the warmth in her eyes cooled to something neutral. "You think I just barged in and ruined your life," she said flatly. "No," I replied. "I think you came here assuming I would make room for you no matter what it cost me. And you were right. I did. But I won't anymore." She crossed her arms. "You've always had this savior complex, Harper," she said, voice sharper now. "And the second someone doesn't need you the way you want to be needed, you flip." It stung. But not because it was true, because it was a classic Madison deflection. A last-ditch pivot toward guilt. I stayed calm. "I don't want to be needed," I said. "I want to be respected." The silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. It rang between us, full of years and wounds and memories too tangled to pull apart. "I thought we were reconnecting," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No, Madison. You thought I was still available for your chaos. That's not the same thing." She looked like she might cry. But I didn't move toward her this time. For most of my life, tears from Madison had been my cue to soften, to bend, to swallow my frustration and become the safe harbor. But now I saw those tears differently, not as manipulation necessarily, but as a well-worn survival tactic. And I wasn't going to be part of that cycle anymore. "I need you to find somewhere else to stay," I said. "Today." Her mouth opened slightly in protest. "I'll help you figure it out," I added. "But this house, my house, is not available anymore. I need it back." And I meant it. Every word. Because what started as a single slice of bread had peeled back everything beneath it. My discomfort, my exhaustion, my self-erasure. All of it. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was clear. And that clarity had taken me almost 4 decades to earn. She didn't yell. She didn't beg. She just turned away, walked upstairs, and shut the door to the guest room quietly. For the first time in days, the house was still. And I stood in the kitchen, heart pounding, looking out the window toward the late spring sky above Washington Park, and felt the first breath of air that actually belonged to me. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. Madison stayed in the guest room with the door closed, emerging only once in the early afternoon to grab her phone charger and a protein bar from her bag. She moved silently, without eye contact, like a roommate you'd fallen out with but couldn't afford to evict. And maybe, in a way, I couldn't. Not emotionally. Not yet. I spent the afternoon trying to work, though the words on my screen felt like static. Every draft I opened seemed disconnected from the conversation that had split my house in two that morning. I kept replaying it in my head, how I'd said it, how she'd responded, what I could have softened, what I shouldn't have apologized for. I knew I hadn't been cruel. But I also knew that cruelty wasn't the only way to wound someone. By evening, I wasn't angry, I was exhausted. Setting a boundary sounds powerful in theory. In practice, it's like emotional surgery, clean but painful. Even when it's necessary, you still walk away bruised. At around 7 p.m., I made dinner. Not for both of us, just for myself. A small gesture, but one that felt strangely monumental. I roasted vegetables, toasted a new slice of bread from the replacement loaf I'd bought that afternoon, and sat at the table alone. I didn't light a candle. I didn't pour a glass of wine. I just ate in the quiet with the windows open and the night air drifting in. It was the first time in a week I didn't feel like I had to perform hospitality. Around 9, she finally came downstairs. She was in leggings and a faded t-shirt that I vaguely remembered from our teenage years, some vintage print with a fraying neckline. Her hair was damp from a shower. Her face clean, bare. I looked up but said nothing. She hovered for a moment, like she wasn't sure if she should speak. "Hey," she said eventually, voice tentative. I nodded once. "Hey." A long pause. "I booked a hotel," she said, glancing at the floor. "It's about a mile away. Just for a few nights until I figure out next steps." I nodded again. "Okay." Another pause. This one heavier. "I didn't mean to make you feel invaded," she said. I genuinely thought it would be okay. I could have responded a dozen different ways. I could have dissected the way she always genuinely thought things would be okay, how that word had been her shield for years. But I didn't. Because I wasn't interested in dismantling her defenses anymore. I was interested in preserving mine. "I believe you," I said simply. She looked at me then, really looked. For a flicker of a second, I saw the little sister I used to protect, the girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering that she didn't feel safe. She was still in there, somewhere beneath the chaos. But it wasn't my job to keep coaxing her out. "I'm leaving in the morning," she added. "Early. Do you need a ride?" She shook her head. "I'll walk." And just like that, she turned and went back upstairs. No fight. No drama. No final plea. It was almost more jarring than if she had screamed. I stayed downstairs for a while, cleaning up the untouched remnants of dinner. I poured the last of the herbal tea into the sink, wiped the counter, refolded the throw blanket she'd left draped across the couch. Every motion felt symbolic, like I was restoring balance atom by atom. I went to bed that night unsure how I felt. Not triumphant. Not regretful. Just quiet. A strange, unfamiliar quiet that came not from suppression but from relief. The kind of quiet that settles in when a long-held tension finally releases. I didn't hear her leave the next morning. When I came downstairs at 7 a.m., the guest room was empty. The bed made. Towels folded. Her bag was gone. The only thing she left behind was a mug in the sink and a faint scent of lavender from the essential oil she used at night. She hadn't said goodbye. But that was fine. Goodbyes in our family had always been tricky. We were better at drifting than departing. I stood there in the middle of my kitchen, and felt for the first time since the housewarming like I was actually home again. And this time I wasn't going to share the deed to my peace. I didn't tell anyone Madison had left. Not at first. Not Elijah, not my coworkers, not even my parents when they texted me later that week with their usual gentle check-in. Just thinking about you. Hope the housewarming went beautifully. Can't wait to hear all about it. There was nothing urgent behind my silence. No avoidance. No shame. I just needed to sit in the stillness for a while, to learn what it sounded like again when the only voice I had to manage was my own. I kept my days full. I returned to work with sharper focus than I'd had in weeks. I restructured a client proposal that had been dragging in development, and when I presented the updated concept in the Tuesday meeting, my director nodded slowly and said, "This feels like you again." It was such a simple statement. I almost missed the weight of it. Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? Feeling like myself again. Or maybe, for the first time. Madison hadn't taken anything from me, not really. She hadn't broken anything in the house. She hadn't crashed my car or stolen money or burned bridges with my friends. She wasn't malicious. She was just Madison. And that was the harder truth. The damage wasn't dramatic. It was ambient. Crept in softly. In the way I stopped playing music in the mornings so I wouldn't disturb her. In the way I adjusted my schedule to avoid conflict. In the way I second-guessed every sentence I spoke, unsure which version of her I'd wake up to each day. She didn't need to yell to unbalance the room. Her presence alone tilted everything off axis. And I had allowed it. Again. But not all the way. Not this time. And that distinction mattered more than I realized. Because the version of me who existed before Madison arrived, the version who curated the playlist for the housewarming, who arranged the flowers and stood barefoot in her finished kitchen under soft lighting with a glass of chilled wine, she was still here. She hadn't disappeared. She had just gone quiet for a few days like a lighthouse in fog. And now she was visible again. That Saturday I drove back to the bakery on Pearl Street. The line was long, as always. I waited under a cloudless Colorado sky, sunglasses on, tote bag in hand, listening to the low murmur of strangers and the warm chatter of a toddler behind me announcing the shape of every passing dog. When it was my turn, I bought 2 loaves of the sourdough. One to freeze, one to savor. And I bought the fig jam again. A small indulgence that felt like a reclaiming. At home, I turned on the speakers. Joni Mitchell of all things. 'Cause I wouldn't let her soundtrack ruin music I actually liked. I toasted a slice. Bread it with jam. Sat at the same table I had sat at during that heavy, silent dinner a week earlier. But this time I lit a candle. Poured a glass of wine, even if it was 2 p.m. And I said out loud to no one in particular, "This is mine." Not in defiance. Not in defense. Just a quiet affirmation that this space, this life, belonged to me again. That evening, I opened a new document on my laptop. Nothing professional. No client deadlines. Just a blank page titled, "What Comes Next?" I didn't know what I was writing toward yet. Maybe a travel plan. Maybe just a list of wants that had nothing to do with being responsible for anyone else. But the title felt good. Forward-facing. I wrote the first sentence without hesitation. I don't need to explain my piece to anyone. I sat back. Took a sip of wine. Looked around my home. Everything was right where I left it. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. The email came on Sunday morning. Subject line, "Just checking in." Sent from my mother's iPad, which meant she had taken time to sit down at the kitchen table, probably with a cup of herbal tea, typing slowly with her index fingers while my father read over her shoulder. There was nothing unusual about the message, at least not on the surface. Began the way most of her emails did. Hi, sweetheart. We've been thinking about you and the housewarming. Wish we could have been there. Hope it was everything you dreamed of. Can't wait to hear all about it. How's the weather? How's work? Love, Mom and Dad *. But then came the final paragraph, short, almost offhand. By the way, Madison mentioned she stopped by. Sounds like she's going through a rough patch again. She said you were a little distant. Is everything okay between you two? We'd love to know if there's anything we can do to help you both reconnect. Reconnect. That word did something to me. I sat there, the mug of coffee cooling in my hand, rereading the message with a slow, deliberate calm that masked the pulse quickening at my wrist. It wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. No acknowledgement that she had shown up uninvited. No mention of how long she stayed or the way she settled into my space like she was entitled to it. No curiosity about my version of events. Just a gentle nudge toward reconciliation, wrapped in lowercase concern and careful phrasing. And suddenly I wasn't reading an email. I was reading a script, one I knew by heart. Madison plays the struggling soul. I play the stable one. She shows up broken, I offer shelter. She cries, I comfort. She leaves, I clean up the emotional debris. And my parents? They watch the show from the front row, mistaking Madison's chaos for fragility and my silence for strength. I closed the email and stared at the floor. The quiet fury I felt wasn't new. But this time it didn't stay buried. It rose, not as rage, but as something sharper, clarity. They didn't see it because I never let them. I had spent so long minimizing my discomfort that they genuinely believed I didn't have any. Because I didn't call them crying when she arrived. Because I didn't complain about the way she took up space. 'Cause I handled it like I always did. And in doing so, I had taught them to expect my endurance instead of my boundaries. So I responded. Not with venom. Not even with heat. But with something I was learning to trust more than either, honesty. Hi, Mom. Thanks for checking in. The housewarming went beautifully, until Madison showed up unannounced and stayed for nearly a week. She didn't ask. She didn't plan. She assumed. And I let it happen at first because that's the role I've always played in this family. The fixer. The one who adjusts, accommodates, absorbs. But I'm not willing to keep doing that. Not anymore. We're not a little distant. We're fundamentally misaligned. Madison is not a bad person. But she's someone who doesn't respect my space or the emotional cost of her presence. And I'm not going to keep paying for her peace with mine. I'm okay. I promise. But I need you to understand I'm setting boundaries now. Real ones. And that may look like distance. But for me, it feels like finally coming home to myself. Love. Harper. I sat with my finger hovering over the send button longer than I care to admit. Because even now, even after all the therapy, all the rebuilding, all the quiet fury I'd learned to name, there was still that old voice in the back of my head whispering, "Don't upset them." But I pressed it anyway. And the moment I did, I felt something physical release. Like an exhale I'd been holding for years. Not because I expected them to fully understand. But because, for the first time, I wasn't asking them to. I wasn't writing to convince anyone. I was writing to tell the truth. And that truth was simple. My comfort is no longer negotiable. That afternoon, I walked to the park with no destination. No music. No podcast. Just wind in the trees and the soft scuff of my boots on the gravel path. And somewhere between the second bench and the pond where the geese gather at dusk, I realized something I hadn't been able to see clearly before. This wasn't just a shift in my relationship with Madison. It was a shift in my relationship with myself. For most of my life, I thought boundaries were a kind of punishment, A wall. A way of saying I don't care about you anymore. But now I understood. Boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about pulling yourself back in. The following week passed like silk. Not because life was suddenly perfect, but because nothing was pressing against me. There were no closed doors with music pulsing through the walls. No long monologues about energy blocks or astrological shifts. No coffee mugs left half-rinsed in the sink. No performance of collapse that I had to quietly manage from the edges. Just silence. Tensional, golden silence. I didn't rush to fill it. For the first few days, I moved through the house slowly. Watered the snake plant by the front window. Refolded the linen napkins in the drawer. Made tea in the late afternoon just because I could. I sat on the porch for whole hours with nothing but a notepad and the rustle of wind in the trees. I wasn't being productive. I was being present. There's something sacred in the mundane if you let it settle. I started noticing things I had rushed past before. The way the light moved across the hardwood floors in late morning. How the scent of the grapefruit candle lingered even when it wasn't lit. The soft weight of my own breath when I wasn't holding it for someone else. The map of my life had changed. And not because someone had handed me new coordinates, but because I had finally stopped letting other people sketch over my own design. One evening, I went through my closet and pulled out 3 dresses I hadn't worn in years. All beautiful. All chosen during times when I still believed femininity had to be soft and pleasing. I tried them on one by one in front of the mirror, not with hope but with honesty. None of them fit. Not my body, not my life. I put them in a donation bag and didn't look back. The next morning, I booked something I had talked about for over a year but never prioritized, a solo weekend at a wellness lodge in Taos. No one's birthday. No girls' trip. No family obligation. Just me, a room with a fireplace, and a yoga deck that looked out over open sky. I didn't ask permission. Didn't text a group chat for feedback. I clicked confirm and closed the tab with a quiet, private kind of joy. That night, I got a text from Elijah. Hey stranger. Haven't seen you in a while. Dinner next week? I owe you a celebratory toast to your house and maybe your sanity. I smiled. Elijah had always seen through things. Even when I tried to downplay Madison's impact during the party, he had clocked it. Not in a judgmental way. Just with that low-burn insight of someone who'd had to draw their own lines with people they loved. I typed back. Yes to dinner. And yes to toasts. I have more to celebrate than I realized. The next day, I received a short email from my dad. Just a few lines. We read your message. Thank you for sharing your perspective with so much clarity. We're thinking about what you said. And we're listening. Love. Dad. There was no defense. No guilt trip. No attempt to shift blame. Just a pause. And maybe that was enough for now. Because I wasn't looking for a perfect reconciliation. I was looking for acknowledgement. And silence for once was starting to sound like respect. That weekend, I began a new ritual. Every Sunday morning, I'd take a walk to the same little bakery and buy myself something warm and indulgent, a pastry, a loaf, a muffin still soft from the oven. Then I'd come home, set the pastry on the counter like a small altar to my own care, and eat slowly. Not as a reward. Not as a comfort food. But as a declaration. I am allowed to nourish myself. I don't need to earn it. These were small things. Tiny things. But they were mine. And as I started writing again in the evenings, not for work, not for productivity, but for pleasure, I realized that I wasn't rebuilding my old life. I was making a new one. Not a map drawn in reaction to someone else's chaos. A blueprint designed entirely for me. Came late on a Wednesday night, just after I'd turned off the porch light and set my phone on Do Not Disturb. A message from Madison. Preview lit up my screen while I was brushing my teeth. Hey. I've been thinking a lot. Can we talk? I feel like we left things weird and I'd like to clear the air. I stared at the notification for a long time. Not because I didn't know how to respond, but because for the first time in years I didn't feel the pull to respond at all. Not out of anger. And not from hurt. Just detachment. The emotional charge that had always sparked between us, that slow-burning ache I used to carry whenever she withdrew or lashed out, was gone. There was no echo. Just silence. And not the brittle kind that waits to be broken. The strong, settled kind that holds. I placed the phone face down on my nightstand and climbed into bed. I didn't toss. Didn't scroll. Didn't rehearse answers. I just fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, the message was still there. Untouched. Unopened. The old Harper, the version she had known best, would have responded right away. Probably with something thoughtful, measured, emotionally labor-intensive. A draft designed to diffuse tension and re-establish connection. Kind of message that walks on eggshells even when you're the one with bruised feet. But I wasn't that version anymore. I opened the message after coffee, not because I felt obligated, but because I was curious what closure looked like now that I didn't need it. It was longer than I expected. I know I didn't handle things well. I acted like your space was mine and didn't consider what you needed. I don't always know how to show up without taking over. It's something I'm trying to work on. I've been thinking about what you said. About respect. About space. About how much you've probably had to carry without saying anything. I'm not asking for a clean slate. I'm just asking if we can find a way to be in each other's lives without hurting each other. I miss you. Maddie. It was better than I expected. But it was also familiar. Not in a manipulative way, not this time, but in a way that still placed the weight of the relationship back in my hands. It was still my job to interpret, respond, decide, navigate. And I realized I didn't want the job anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I simply didn't want to manage her anymore. But not her feelings. Not her growth. Not her expectations. I picked up my phone, typed slowly, deliberately, and kept it simple. I hear you. I hope you keep doing that work. I need space right now, and I hope you'll respect that. H. I didn't sign it love, Harper. Not to be cold, just to be clear. There was no immediate reply. There didn't need to be. I closed the message thread. Archived it. Then I stood up, tied my hair into a knot at the base of my neck, and started packing for Taos. The weather forecast called for cool evenings and warm mornings. I chose linen, cotton, loose-fitting layers. A wide-brimmed hat. My favorite old journal with the frayed edges. A paperback I hadn't finished. And one of the new dresses I'd bought. Soft black cotton, roomy in the waist, unapologetically comfortable. On my way out, I placed a note in the kitchen. Not because anyone else would see it, but because I needed to. Gone to rest. Don't call unless it's joy. I laughed when I read it back. Sounded like something Madison might say. But this time it wasn't a request. It was a boundary. The good kind. Kind built not from walls but from roots. As I pulled out of the driveway, windows down, music low, sun just starting to break through the trees lining the street, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt centered. No revenge. No righteousness. Just alignment. 'Cause that's the thing no one tells you about finally closing the door on someone who's always needed more than they gave. You don't do it to punish them. You do it so you can finally stop living on a threshold and step fully and finally into your own home.